Last time we talked about Kara from Detroit Become Human, and hopefully you saw that video because I don't really want to waste too much time talking about what this is. This is a three-part series on each of the major things wrong with Detroit Become Human because the game came out roughly a year ago, so I think it's time to do another Sustaining Mediocrity, this time on Detroit Become Human. So today we're going to be talking about another one of the protagonists, Markus. Markus has probably the most interesting story in the game. He starts out being like basically kind of like a butler android to this old artist. I think his name is Walter. But things take a turn when his addict son comes and he wants money, and he won't let him have it, and he stresses his dad out. He's an old man, and so he has a heart attack, and it's like, oh, you can become deviant right now and try to save the artist, or you can just become deviant later in the game when you need to anyway. You wake up in this pit, and then you find this place called Jericho, where other mistreated deviant androids who have decided that they want to be people have formed like a freedom force, and you become their leader for some reason. It's interesting, though, because Markus has the most compelling story. He has the ability to enlighten other androids and make them aware of the fact that they're people with free will. And initially he has to touch them and like share this revelation with them personally. But then later in the game he just is able to look at androids and they can do it. And that starts to be a real big issue, because there's this part where you're marching towards the cops and you're just looking at androids and they're awakening, and it's like, the question that it raised but never answered is, if you're enlightening them and then they immediately join your cause, are they really free, or are you just re-brainwashing them? I thought that would come up and it didn't, so that was really disappointing. And then he has his own cast of supporting characters, primarily North. She's the one that matters the most to him. But she's also a glaring example of why the choices don't really matter when it comes to like character relationships, because North is destined to be Marcus's lover, basically. No matter what, they end up together. You can do whatever you want to be mean to her, be nice to her, impress her, disgust her. There is always a conversation that they have where they talk about their past, and she mentions she used to be a sex bot. And then by the end of that conversation, Markus and North will be kissing. And that's just how it is, you know? There's two interesting branches that I really see with Marcus's story, though. You can be peaceful, you know? And then CyberLife sends people after you, and you have to fight for your own survival. And then there's like an android march where they start getting shot up by all types of cops and stuff. All while Connor, maybe, is trying to help you, help prove that deviancy isn't like a disease that needs to be cured or whatever. It's just, hey, androids are rising up and they want to be treated equally. And that's interesting, but there's also the issue of what happens if you're aggressive. Because then you can just be an android killing, you can be a human killing android machine, and it's very counteractive to the point that he's trying to make. Because Markus, if you want him to be, can be a warmonger type character. It's like, I see my species as the apex predator, humans are beneath us. But that also kind of takes away from the character as he was supposed to be. Quantic Dream definitely made the game with a specific path in mind for each character to take. So if you play it the way that you're supposed to and you're peaceful, then you get, you know, your proper conclusion to Marcus's story. One of the biggest issues with that conclusion is like 80% of the way through his story comes the introduction of the dirty bomb. There's basically a nuke that you can use on Detroit to. It's basically a show of force to assert dominance as the apex species. And as cool as that is, it comes out of nowhere. There is no mention of it possibly existing beforehand. There is no reason for it to exist. It's like Markus goes from, hey, let's steal some things so that we can fix ourselves, to a week later, let's blow up Detroit. And yeah, it's a choice you can make, but still, blowing up Detroit would not accomplish the mission, so you have to not do that. So the question is, where was the dirty bomb, like, conceptualized? Who came up with this, you know? And one thing that I find is an interesting possibility is you could pit Markus against Connor. And I know I should probably talk more about that in Connor's story, but it's interesting because Connor's thing is, I want to get down to the bottom of... I want to get to the bottom of what deviancy is and see if I can snuff it out. And Markus is like, hey, I'm just a person. So for those two characters, for their stories to be the ones that revolve around one another is interesting, but it happens so little. Like, you have to be 65% of the way through Connor's story, 70% of the way through Markus' story for them to even interact for the first time. And it's kind of stupid, but at the same time, it's possible for them to be allies or enemies. And I find it more interesting for them to be enemies. I'll get to that more when I talk about Connor. But the motivation and the purpose and the point, really, behind Marcus's character to his core is he's basically a Martin Luther King type character. He's like, I will do what I must to get what I think is right for my people. I will march, I will protest, I will not be moved. That type of character thing. But it's undercut by so many different things. Like, he's just appointed leader of Jericho because he can be. No matter what you do, the characters end up following your orders regardless, especially since you have android telepathy. And in having android telepathy, why doesn't any other android have that ability? But at the same time, are you liberating these androids or are you indoctrinating them? And it's something that never weighs in on his story. Whereas Kara has no consequences for what she does. There's no ripple for anything Markus does. There's no lasting effects. It's not the same as there not being any consequences, because there absolutely are. Marcus's actions shape the story of the game. They shape the environment that the world is, really. But at the same time, it proves that the game was too ambitious for what it was willing to do. It needed to be a few hours longer for every character, but especially Markus, because there were so many other branches that his story could have gone. Like, it could have happened over the span of a few years rather than a few weeks. Or, it could have, if they had been so creative, it could have directly influenced Kara and Connor's stories, no matter what. Because Markus is an independent force. He is going to liberate his people regardless. But it should also be up to Connor whether or not he's successful. And he kind of always is. So that's what I wanted to say about Markus. I'll get to Connor next. I feel like I have the most to say about him. So I'll see you again pretty soon.
Discord, I'm humming up the moon and sleeping in the middle of a summer afternoon.